Zethkai remained standing for a moment, swaying slightly from the alcohol and the weight of his memories. The cantina around them had grown quieter as the night progressed, with fewer patrons and dimmer lights. Jake waited, sensing that the alien veteran was preparing to share something that might be even more disturbing than what had come before. "Sit down," Jake said gently. "You mentioned a realization that keeps you awake at night." Zethkai lowered himself back into his chair, all four arms moving carefully to maintain his balance. "After the war ended, I spent months trying to understand what I had witnessed. I studied human history, read your military manuals, even interviewed other alien veterans who had fought alongside human forces. What did you discover?" "I discovered that everything I had seen during the Terran Liberation Campaign was normal for humans. The psychological warfare, the adaptive tactics, the ability to understand enemies completely while maintaining moral restraint. These weren't special wartime measures. This is simply how humans approach any serious conflict." Jake felt a chill despite the warm air in the cantina. "You're saying all humans fight this way?" "I'm saying that humans don't distinguish between war and peace the way other species do. You apply the same level of analytical thinking, strategic planning, and psychological understanding to every aspect of your lives. War just makes it more visible." Zethkai ordered another drink, his fifth of the evening. "Let me tell you about a conversation I had with Lieutenant Paul Davis after the battle at Proxima Centauri." I asked him how he had learned to understand alien psychology so completely. "What did he tell you?" Davis said he had studied human psychology first. He understood how human minds worked under stress, how they processed fear and aggression, how they formed social bonds and made tactical decisions. Once he understood his own species completely, adapting that knowledge to alien minds was just a matter of identifying the differences. The alien's new drink arrived, and he stared into it without taking a sip. But then Davis said something that made my blood freeze. He said that humans had been studying and manipulating each other for thousands of years before they ever encountered alien species. Your entire civilization is built on understanding and controlling human psychology. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That sounds like you're describing politics and social science?" "I'm describing a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to predict, influence, and control the behavior of intelligent beings. When you encountered alien species, you simply applied techniques you had already perfected on yourselves." Zethkai finally took a drink, then continued. "I interviewed Captain Maria Santos 6 months after the war ended. She had returned to civilian life and was working as a corporate negotiator. I asked her how she was adjusting to peaceful work. How did she respond?" Santos laughed and said that corporate negotiations were more challenging than military combat. In war, she only had to understand enemy psychology well enough to defeat them. In business, she had to understand client psychology well enough to make them happy while achieving her own objectives. The alien's yellow eyes focused on Jake with disturbing intensity. "Do you understand what she was telling me? Human business practices require more sophisticated psychological manipulation than human military tactics. Your entire economy is based on understanding and influencing behavior patterns." Jake felt his mouth go dry. "You make it sound like humans are naturally deceptive, not deceptive. Naturally gifted at understanding intelligent behavior and adapting to it. But here's what truly terrifies me about your species." Zethkai leaned forward. "You do all of this unconsciously. These abilities that seem supernatural to other species are just normal human social skills to you. I don't follow. Every human child learns to read facial expressions, predict emotional reactions, and modify their own behavior to influence others. You call it growing up. You don't even realize that most alien species never develop these capabilities to the same degree." Zethkai took another drink before continuing. "I spoke with Corporal Amy Foster a year after the siege. She had become a xenobiologist, studying alien life forms for peaceful research. When I asked her about her wartime experiences, she seemed genuinely surprised that other species found her abilities unusual." "What did she say?" Foster said that understanding alien biology was just an extension of understanding human biology. She said that all intelligent life followed similar patterns. And once you learned to recognize those patterns, predicting behavior became routine. The alien's voice grew quieter. She showed me her current research on Centauri reproduction cycles. Foster had identified ways to improve their fertility rates and extend their lifespans. She was using the same analytical skills that had made her deadly in combat to help an alien species thrive. Jake stared at his notes, trying to process the implications. So humans can use these abilities for good or evil? Humans use these abilities for whatever serves their purposes at the time. That's what makes you truly alien to the rest of us. You have conscious control over your own nature in ways that no other species has achieved. Zethkai finished his drink and set the cup down with finality. Let me tell you about the conversation that changed everything for me. I was speaking with Admiral Carter at a diplomatic reception 2 years after the war. I asked him what humans had learned from the conflict. What did he say? Carter said that the war had been educational, but not because of the military victories. He said humans had learned valuable information about how different species think, communicate, and make decisions under stress. He called it a cultural exchange opportunity. The alien's claws drummed against the table. I realized that Carter wasn't being cynical or cruel. He genuinely saw the entire war as a learning experience that would help humans interact more effectively with alien species in the future. Even in the middle of life-and-death combat, humans were gathering information for peaceful purposes. Jake felt a deep unease settling in his stomach. You're saying humans were studying aliens during the war to understand them better as friends? I'm saying that humans don't distinguish between studying enemies and studying friends. You analyze everyone and everything around you with the same level of intensity. The only difference is how you apply that knowledge afterward. Zethkai stood up again, this time more steadily. That's why I've remained silent about my experiences for so long. The other species in the galaxy see humans as cooperative allies because you choose to be cooperative. But you could just as easily choose to be something else entirely. And that frightens you? What frightens me is that humans make that choice consciously, every single day. You decide whether to be helpful or harmful, peaceful or dangerous, based on what you think will produce the best results. That level of control over your own nature is beyond anything the rest of us can comprehend. The alien warrior looked down at Jake with those unsettling yellow eyes. Your species calls it humanity F****** in your entertainment. You think it's about courage or determination or technological superiority, but you're missing the real point. What's the real point? The real point is that humans are the most adaptable, intelligent species in the galaxy. You can become whatever any situation requires while remaining fundamentally human. You can be the most compassionate healers or the most efficient killers, often at the same time. Zethkai turned to leave, then paused. The rest of the galaxy doesn't call it humanity F******. We call it the human variable, the unknown factor that changes the outcome of any situation simply by being present. Jake watched the alien walk away, processing everything he had heard. As he reviewed his notes, one final realization struck him. Zethkai had spent the entire evening analyzing Jake's reactions, studying his questions, and observing his emotional responses. The alien had been applying the same techniques that had made humans so terrifying in combat, but Jake had been doing the same thing to Zethkai without even realizing it. He had been reading the alien's body language, adapting his questions based on emotional cues, and gathering information about alien psychology through casual conversation. Jake turned off his recording device and stared at the data he had collected. He realized that he now understood exactly what made humans truly dangerous in the eyes of other species. It wasn't their weapons or their courage or their technology. It was their ability to turn any interaction, even a friendly conversation, in a cantina into an opportunity to understand and influence intelligent behavior. And they did it so naturally that they didn't even notice they were doing it. For the first time in his career as a journalist, Jake wondered if some stories were too dangerous to tell, Zethkai ordered another drink, his fourth of the evening. Jake noticed that the alien's speech remained clear despite the alcohol, but his yellow eyes had grown more distant, as if he was seeing events from long ago playing out in front of him. The siege of Kepler 442b was just a minor engagement compared to what happened at Proxima Centauri, Zethkai said, his voice heavy with memory. That battle showed me what humans could do when they stopped holding back. Jake adjusted his recording device. You mentioned this was the final battle of the Terran Liberation Campaign? The Hive had gathered their entire remaining fleet at Proxima Centauri. Every ship, every warrior, every breeding queen. They were making their last stand, and they outnumbered the combined human and allied forces by almost 50-1. Zethkai's claws scraped against his cup. Any reasonable military commander would have called for a siege or waited for reinforcements. But the humans didn't do that? Admiral John Carter ordered an immediate attack. Not because he was reckless or desperate, but because the humans had spent the previous 6 months preparing for this exact scenario. They had studied every battle, analyzed every hive tactic, and developed something they called Protocol 7. Jake made notes quickly. What was Protocol 7? Zethkai was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. I didn't learn the full details until years later when some of the classified reports were declassified. At the time, all I knew was that the human fleet approached the Hive forces in a formation that violated every known principle of space combat. How so? They spread their ships out across a massive area, making themselves harder to defend and easier to pick off individually. Their flagship, the USS Defiance, actually moved ahead of the main formation, directly toward the center of the Hive fleet. It looked like suicide. The alien took a long drink before continuing. The battle began exactly as expected. The Hive swarmed the human ships, focusing their attack on the isolated vessels. Within the first hour, several human ships had taken heavy damage. It appeared that Admiral Carter had made a fatal tactical error. Jake leaned forward. But that wasn't what was really happening. The humans weren't trying to win a conventional space battle. They were conducting the largest intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. Every damaged ship, every weapons exchange, every tactical maneuver was being recorded and analyzed in real time. Zethkai's voice grew quieter. Major Kate Phillips led a boarding party onto a Hive mothership that had been damaged in the initial exchange. But they weren't trying to capture or destroy the vessel. They were studying it from the inside while fighting for their lives. That seems incredibly dangerous, Jake observed. It was beyond dangerous. It was insane by any normal military standard. Phillips and her team spent 4 hours inside that ship, gathering data about Hive technology, biology, command structures, and communication systems. They were literally dissecting their enemies while under constant attack. The alien's hands trembled slightly as he continued. What Phillips discovered changed everything. The Hive weren't just a military force. They were a biological machine, designed for one purpose, consuming and converting other species. But they had a fatal weakness that no one had ever identified. What kind of weakness? The Hive operated on a quantum consciousness network. Every individual creature was connected to a central intelligence that coordinated their actions. Phillips found the organic transmitters that maintained this connection, and she discovered something remarkable. Zethkai paused to signal for another drink. The network wasn't just for communication. It was for emotional regulation. Hive creatures couldn't experience fear, doubt, or individual thought without being connected to the central consciousness. Cut them off from the network, and they would become paralyzed by emotions they had never learned to process. Jake felt his blood run cold. The humans found a way to disconnect them? Better than that. Phillips transmitted her findings to the human fleet in real time. Within 2 hours, human engineers had developed a weapon that could disrupt the quantum frequencies that maintained the Hive consciousness network. The alien's new drink arrived, and he took a careful sip. But here's what made it truly terrifying. The humans didn't use this weapon to destroy the Hive immediately. They used it selectively, cutting off small groups of hive creatures to study their individual reactions. They were experimenting on them during the battle. The humans turned the entire conflict into a laboratory. They would isolate groups of hive fighters, observe how they reacted to being cut off from their collective consciousness, and then use that information to develop more effective tactics against other groups. Zethkai's voice carried a mixture of admiration and horror. Lieutenant Paul Davis was monitoring hive communications throughout the battle. He discovered that the isolated creatures were broadcasting distress signals that the connected hive could receive but not understand. These signals were actually making the rest of the hive forces nervous and confused. So the humans weaponized the hive's own communication system? Davis began transmitting artificial distress signals that mimicked the patterns of the isolated creatures. But he didn't just copy the signals. He amplified them, modified them, and broadcast them in ways that would cause maximum psychological damage to the connected hive forces. The alien leaned back in his chair. Within 6 hours, the largest hive fleet in galactic history was retreating, in complete disorder. Not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they had been driven insane by their own communication network turned against them. Jake stared at his notes, trying to process the implications. The humans won by understanding the enemy better than the enemy understood themselves. They did something worse than win. They solved the hive problem permanently. Captain Maria Santos had been developing psychological profiles of hive command structures throughout the battle. She identified the specific frequency patterns that would cause maximum disruption to their collective consciousness. Zethkai's voice grew very quiet. The humans could have used this knowledge to commit genocide. They had the ability to broadcast a signal that would drive every hive creature in the galaxy insane simultaneously. The technology existed. The targeting data was available. The opportunity was there, but they didn't do it? Admiral Carter gave the order to cease the psychological attacks once the hive fleet began retreating. He said that the objective was to end the threat, not to exterminate an entire species. The humans had proven they could destroy the hive completely whenever they chose to, and that proof was enough. The alien finished his drink in one gulp. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Your species developed the capability to commit genocide in the middle of a battle, used that capability to win the war, and then chose not to use it completely. That level of restraint combined with that level of lethality is what makes humans truly terrifying. Jake set down his stylus, his hand shaking slightly. You're saying humans are dangerous because they choose not to be as dangerous as they could be? I'm saying that humans are the only species I've encountered that can become exactly as dangerous as any situation requires, and then stop being dangerous the moment the situation changes. That kind of conscious control over your own nature defies everything we thought we knew about intelligent life. Zethkai stood up slowly, steadying himself with one hand on the table. The hive surrender was broadcast across the galaxy within hours. But what most species didn't understand was that humans hadn't just won a war. They had demonstrated that they could study, understand, and defeat any enemy they encountered, using that enemy's own nature against them. The alien looked down at Jake with those disturbing yellow eyes. And that brings me to the most frightening realization of all, the one that keeps me awake at night even now. Jake noticed that Zethkai's hands had begun to shake slightly as he spoke. The alien warrior stared into his drink as if seeing ghosts in the green liquid. You want to know what really disturbed me? Zethkai asked without looking up. It wasn't the tactics or the weapons or even the psychological warfare. It was how your people changed during combat, yet somehow remained exactly who they were. I'm not sure I follow, Jake said, adjusting his recording device. Every species I've fought alongside develops what we call battle madness. Valorians become more aggressive and less careful. Centauri become withdrawn and overly cautious. Rigelians lose their ability to think creatively. War damages us, makes us less than what we were before. Zethkai finally looked up, his yellow eyes focusing on Jake with disturbing intensity. Humans do the opposite. War makes you more human, not less. You become more analytical, more creative, more adaptable. You don't lose yourselves in combat. You find yourselves. The alien reached for his drink with one of his upper arms while gesturing with a lower one. Let me tell you about Corporal Amy Foster. She was assigned as a medic to my unit during the siege. Small woman, maybe half my size, with gentle hands and a quiet voice. The kind of person you'd expect to treat wounded soldiers and stay away from the fighting. But she didn't, Jake guessed. Foster saved my life 3 times during that siege. Not through medical treatment, though she was skilled at that too. She saved me by understanding the enemy better than our best tactical analysts. HFY's voice carried a mixture of gratitude and unease. The first time was during a night attack. The hive had sent a new type of creature, something we'd never seen before. It was faster than their usual warriors, silent, and it could see in complete darkness. Jake made notes as HFY continued. This thing had killed 12 of my soldiers before we even knew it was there. Our sensors couldn't track it, our weapons couldn't hit it, and our defensive positions were useless against it. We were preparing to retreat from an entire section of the tunnel complex. How did Foster help? She spent 2 hours studying the attack sites. Not looking for tactical information, but examining the biological evidence. She found traces of secretions, claw marks, even fragments of shed skin. Then she did something that horrified my warriors. HFY paused to take another drink. She tasted the secretions. Jake's eyes widened. She what? Foster put samples of alien biological matter in her mouth and analyzed the taste. She said human taste buds could detect chemical compounds that their portable scanners couldn't identify. Within minutes, she had determined the creature's diet, its stress levels, and its reproductive status. The alien's claws drummed nervously against the table. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was how she used that information. Foster realized that this creature was actually dying. It was attacking us not from aggression, but from desperation. Its biology was breaking down, and it was trying to consume specific proteins to survive. So she found a way to help it? Jake asked. HFY's laugh was sharp and bitter. Help it? No, Foster did something much more effective. She synthesized a compound that would accelerate its biological breakdown. Then she spread that compound throughout our defensive positions. Jake felt his stomach turn. She poisoned it? She turned our entire defensive perimeter into a trap designed around the creature's specific biology. When it attacked again, seeking the proteins it needed to survive, it instead consumed something that killed it within minutes. But the truly unsettling part was how she explained it to me afterward. The alien leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Foster said she felt sorry for the creature. She understood its desperation, its pain, its biological needs. She could empathize with its suffering while simultaneously creating the most efficient method to kill it. That combination of compassion and lethality is something no other species can achieve. Jake set down his stylus, disturbed by the implications. You're saying humans can understand their enemies and still destroy them? More than that, humans use understanding as a weapon. The better you understand something, the more effectively you can kill it, and you do it without losing your basic humanity. HFY finished his drink in one gulp. Let me tell you about Sergeant Kevin Blake, another human in your unit. Blake had been fighting the hive for 2 straight years before the siege began. He should have been suffering from severe combat fatigue like any normal soldier would. Instead, he was the most dangerous individual I've ever encountered. HFY signaled for another drink before continuing. Blake didn't just fight the hive, he studied them like a scientist studies lab specimens. He kept detailed notes about every encounter, every wound pattern, every behavioral quirk. He could predict what type of hive creature would attack based on weather conditions, time of day, and the phase of the planet's moons. That sounds like good tactical intelligence, Jake observed. It was beyond tactics. Blake had developed what he called empathy mapping for the hive. He could think like them, predict their emotional responses, anticipate their fears and desires. He understood them so completely that he could manipulate their behavior without them realizing it. The alien's new drink arrived, and he took a careful sip. During one attack, Blake positioned himself as bait to lure a hive assault team into a specific tunnel. But he didn't just wait for them to find him. He used sounds, scents, and movement patterns that would trigger their hunting instincts in exactly the way he wanted. Did it work? The hive creatures followed his trail exactly as he predicted. They walked into a trap that killed 30 of them in less than 5 minutes. But afterward, Blake sat down and wrote detailed notes about their reactions, their formation, changes, their communication patterns. He was learning from their deaths. Zethkai's voice grew quieter. I asked Blake why he kept such detailed records. He said that every hive creature that died taught him something about how to kill the next. One more efficiently? He wasn't just fighting a war. He was conducting a massive research project with the goal of understanding his enemies so completely that defeating them would become routine. Jake looked up from his notes. That sounds almost obsessive. That's what I thought at first. But then I realized that Blake wasn't obsessed. He was simply applying human intelligence to warfare in a way that no other species had ever conceived. He was turning combat into a science. The alien stared into his drink again. The most disturbing conversation I ever had was with Blake during the final week of the siege. I asked him if the constant fighting bothered him, if he ever felt sorry. For the hive creatures he killed, what did he say? Blake said he felt sorry for them all the time. He understood their biology, their social structures, their evolutionary pressures. He knew they were just trying to survive and reproduce like any other species. But he also said that understanding them made it easier to kill them, not harder. Zethkai met Jake's eyes. He explained that sympathy and lethality weren't opposites for humans. They were tools that worked together. The more you understood someone, the more effectively you could either help them or destroy them, depending on what the situation required. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You make it sound like humans are naturally manipulative. Not manipulative. Adaptable in ways that transcend normal biological limitations. You can become whatever you need to be while remaining fundamentally yourselves. That level of conscious control over your own nature is what makes you different from every other species in the galaxy. The alien finished his drink and set the cup down with a metallic clink. And that difference becomes truly terrifying when you apply it to warfare on a large scale. Wait until I tell you about what happened at Proxima Centauri when humans had to fight not just individual battles but an entire war. Zethkai stared at his drink for several long moments before beginning. The cantina noise seemed to fade around their table as he prepared to share memories that had haunted him for years. Kepler 442b was supposed to be a simple mining operation. He said finally, the planet had rich deposits of quantum crystals that both our species needed for faster-than-light travel. The hive attacked without warning, as they always do. Within hours, they had surrounded our combined forces and cut off all escape routes. Jake listened carefully, his recording device capturing every word. How many troops were trapped? 3,000 Valorian warriors, 800 human marines, and about 200 support personnel from various allied species. The hive had us outnumbered 20-1, and they controlled the surface completely. Our only option was to retreat into the underground mining tunnels and hope for rescue. Zethkai took another drink before continuing. The first month wasn't too bad. We had enough supplies and the tunnels were defensible. The hive would send wave attacks down the main shafts and we would beat them back. It was standard siege warfare, the kind my people have practiced for centuries. Honorable combat with clear objectives. What changed? Jake asked. Captain Lisa Hayes called a meeting with all the senior officers. She had been studying the hive attack patterns, and she said something that made my blood run cold. She said the hive weren't trying to kill us quickly. They were farming us. Jake frowned. Farming? The hive reproduced by implanting eggs in living hosts. The eggs need specific conditions to develop properly, including stress hormones that only come from prolonged fear and combat. Hayes realized that the hive were keeping us alive and under constant pressure to create the perfect breeding environment. The Valorian's claws scraped against his metal cup as his grip tightened. When Hayes explained this to the other human officers, they didn't react with horror or disgust like the rest of us. They reacted with cold calculation. Sergeant Ben Parker said, and I remember his exact words, "If they want to farm us, we need to make ourselves poisonous livestock." What did that mean? Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. It meant that the humans decided to turn the siege into a psychological warfare laboratory. Instead of just defending our positions, they began studying every hive creature that attacked us. They captured wounded ones alive and examined them. They recorded their sounds and analyzed their behavior patterns. They even started dissecting the dead ones to understand their biology better. Zethkai paused, his yellow eyes distant with memory. Private Danny Cox volunteered to be bait for a particularly large hive creature that had been stalking our perimeter. But he didn't just offer himself as a target. He spent 3 days preparing, studying how the creature moved, what attracted its attention, how it communicated with others of its kind. Did the plan work? Jake asked. Work? Zethkai let out that bitter laugh again. Cox didn't just kill the creature. He used its own hunting instincts against it, led it into a trap that captured it alive, and then spent hours learning how to mimic its distress calls. By the end of the week, Cox could make sounds that sent entire hive patrols fleeing in terror. Jake felt his stomach turn slightly. That seems like effective tactics. Effective, yes. But it was what happened next that showed me the true nature of human warfare. Cox taught those calls to other humans, and they began using them systematically. They would lure hive creatures into specific tunnels, then use the distress calls to create panic among the attacking forces. The alien leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. But they didn't stop there. They started experimenting with different combinations of sounds, different intensities, different timing. They turned the hive's own communication system into a weapon that could drive them insane. Jake made notes on his tablet, trying to process what he was hearing. How did the other species react to these tactics? The Valorian warriors were disturbed but impressed. We understood the value of knowing your enemy. But the Centauri observers requested immediate evacuation. They said humans were violating the natural order by using intelligence as a weapon in ways that transcended normal combat. Zethkai finished his second drink and signaled for a third. By the second month, the siege had transformed into something unrecognizable. The humans had mapped every tunnel, cataloged every type of hive creature, and developed countermeasures for attacks that hadn't even happened yet. They were winning? Jake asked. They were doing something worse than winning. They were learning. Captain Hayes had her people collecting samples of everything. Hive biomatter, their secretions, fragments of their armor, even the soil where they had walked. She said they were building a complete profile of hive biology. The alien's third drink arrived, and he took a long sip before continuing. Sergeant Parker came up with what he called fear campaigns. He would take small teams deep into hive territory, not to attack, but to leave behind evidence of human presence. Strange markings, unusual sounds, objects placed in locations that would confuse and unnerve the hive creatures. Psychological warfare, Jake observed. Beyond anything my people had ever conceived, the humans weren't just trying to demoralize the enemy. They were trying to make the hive question their own instincts, doubt their own senses, fear their own environment. Zethkai's voice grew quieter. By the third month, the hive attacks had become erratic and desperate. They were no longer following their usual patterns. They seemed confused, frightened, uncertain. Some of our scouts reported seeing hive creatures attacking each other. The human tactics were working? They were working too well. That's when I realized what truly frightened me about your species. It wasn't your weapons or your courage or your tactical skills. It was your ability to understand your enemies so completely that you could manipulate their deepest instincts. Jake set down his stylus. You make it sound like humans were the real predators in that situation. That's exactly what you were. The hive thought they were farming us, but the humans had turned the entire siege into a laboratory for studying and controlling alien psychology. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to learn how to defeat any similar enemy they might encounter in the future. Sethkai met Jake's eyes directly. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Your people don't just win wars. You solve the underlying problem that caused the war in the first place. You study your enemies until you understand them better than they understand themselves, and then you use that knowledge to ensure they can never threaten you again. The aliens' claws drummed against the table. The rescue fleet arrived at the end of the third month. When they broke through the hive lines, they found something unprecedented. 3,000 Valorian warriors, 800 human marines, and somehow we had not only survived, but we had turned a desperate siege into a complete intelligence victory. What happened to the hive forces? Sethkai was quiet for a long moment. They retreated. Not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were afraid. An entire hive army fled from a force they outnumbered 20-1 because humans had made them afraid of their own shadows. Jake stared at his notes, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. And this was just one battle? This was just the beginning, Sethkai said grimly. Wait until I tell you what happened at Proxima Centauri. The cantina on Nexus Station buzzed with the usual mix of traders, miners and off-duty soldiers from a dozen different worlds. Blue smoke drifted through the air from various alien substances being consumed at tables scattered across the dimly lit room. In the far corner, away from the noise and crowds, sat a figure that most patrons gave a wide berth. Commander Sethkai hunched over his table, all four of his gray arms wrapped around a large metal cup filled with something that glowed faintly. Green, his reptilian face showed deep scars from old battles, and his yellow eyes stared into the liquid as if searching for answers he couldn't find. The Valorian had been coming to this same spot every night for 3 months, always alone, always drinking the same bitter concoction that helped dull memories he wished he could forget entirely. Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd, his press badge catching the light from the overhead lamps. The young human journalist had been working the station for weeks, collecting stories about the recent peace treaties between the various alien species. Most interviews had been routine affairs full of diplomatic language and careful political statements. Nothing that would make headlines or capture readers back on Earth. But tonight felt different. Jake had overheard fragments of conversation from the Valorian's table, words spoken in heavily accented standard that mentioned humans and war in the same breath. For a species known for their military prowess and honor codes, any Valorian speaking about combat was worth investigating. Jake approached slowly, knowing that Valorians could be unpredictable when drinking. Their alcohol affected their nervous systems differently than humans, often making them more emotional rather than drowsy. Excuse me, Jake said, stopping a respectful distance from the table. I'm Jake Morrison from Earth News Network. I couldn't help but notice you're alone, and I wondered if you might be interested in talking about your experiences during the recent conflicts. Sethkai's head snapped up, his yellow eyes focusing on the human with predatory sharpness. For a moment, Jake wondered if he'd made a serious mistake. Valorians were twice the size of humans and had natural weapons in the form of razor-sharp claws. Go away, human! Sethkai growled, his voice carrying the distinctive hissing quality of his species. I have nothing to say to reporters. Jake didn't move. Something in the alien's tone suggested pain rather than anger. I'm not looking for political statements or propaganda. I write about the personal side of war, how it affects individuals. Sometimes talking helps. Talking helps? Sethkai let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. You think words can fix what I've seen, what I've learned about your kind? The comment caught Jake's attention. My kind? What do you mean? Sethkai studied Jake's face for a long moment, then gestured with one of his lower arms toward an empty chair. Sit down, young reporter, but understand something before I begin. Once you hear what I have to say, you'll never look at your own species the same way again. Jake pulled out the chair and sat down, pulling out a small recording device. Do. You mind if I record this? Record it, broadcast it. Print it in your newspapers. It doesn't matter. Zethkai took a long drink from his cup. The galaxy needs to know what humans really are when pushed to their limits. I'm not sure I understand. Humans have a reputation for being cooperative, diplomatic. We've worked well with most species we've encountered. Zethkai's laugh was darker this time. Yes, that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. You can be the most reasonable, peaceful beings in the galaxy right up until the moment you decide not to be. Then you become something else entirely. Jake leaned forward. Are you talking about the Terran Liberation Campaign? I know human forces worked alongside Valorian units during that conflict. Worked alongside, Zethkai repeated the word slowly. That's one way to describe it. Another way would be to say that I witnessed humans at war, and it changed everything I thought I knew about the nature of intelligent life. The alien paused, staring into his drink again. When he continued, his voice was quieter, more thoughtful. I commanded a battalion of Valorian warriors during the siege of Kepler 442b. We were considered elite troops. Veterans of multiple campaigns? We followed the traditional codes of honor that have guided my people for thousands of years. We believed in clean battles, honorable death, and victory through superior tactics and courage. That sounds admirable, Jake said. It was, until we were joined by a contingent of human marines. At first, we welcomed them. Your reputation as brave fighters preceded you. But bravery wasn't what made you dangerous. It was something much worse. Jake frowned. Worse how? Zethkai drained his cup and signaled for another. Let me tell you about Captain Lisa Hayes and her unit. When they arrived at our forward base, they didn't introduce themselves with boasts about their victories or displays of their weapons. Instead, they asked questions. Hundreds of questions about our enemy, the Hive. They wanted to know everything. How they moved, how they communicated, what they ate, how they reproduced, what scared them. Intelligence gathering is standard military practice, Jake observed. Not like this. Other species gather intelligence to plan attacks or avoid traps. Humans gather intelligence to understand their enemies so completely that they can predict every move, counter every strategy, and exploit every weakness. But that's not the frightening part. Jake waited, sensing there was more to come. The frightening part was that they didn't hate the Hive. They didn't fight out of anger, or revenge, or even self-defense in the traditional sense. They fought with the cold efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. They studied the enemy like scientists examining specimens, and then they applied that knowledge with a precision that chilled my blood. Zethkai's new drink arrived, and he took a careful sip before continuing. During the first week of joint operations, I thought the humans were simply thorough. By the second week, I realized they were calculating. By the third week, I understood. But they were planning something that went far beyond winning battles. They were planning to win the war by becoming something their enemies had never encountered before. What do you mean? Jake asked. I mean that humans don't just adapt to warfare. You transform warfare into something that serves your purposes. You take the rules of engagement and bend them until they work in your favor, but you never quite break them. You find ways to be more terrifying than your enemies while maintaining the moral high ground. It's a kind of psychological manipulation that no other species has mastered. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You make it sound like humans are naturally deceptive. Not deceptive, adaptive, frighteningly, impossibly adaptive. You become whatever you need to be to survive and win, but you never lose sight of who you are underneath. That combination of flexibility and core identity is what makes you the most dangerous species I've ever encountered. Zethkai leaned back in his chair, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake's face. Do you really want to hear about what your people did during that siege? About the things that made hardened Valorian warriors wake up screaming from nightmares? About why 3 other alien species requested immediate transfer away from human units? Jake nodded, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Then I'll tell you about the siege of Kepler 442b, and you'll understand why the rest of the galaxy watches humanity with a mixture of respect and barely concealed terror.